Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie, and in this video I'm going to be looking at the weekend of May the 3rd and May the 4th 2025, and it's actually quite a hectic weekend. There's a lot going on. We've got Sun semisquare Saturn, we've got Mars semisquare Jupiter, we've got first quarter moon, we've got Pluto stationary, and when you put this all together, this weekend there's nothing trivial about what's going on. And in terms of what I want to talk about in this video, I want to sort of focus on one aspect in particular, which is that semisquare between Mars and Jupiter. I think that is a big deal, but then the Sun semisquare Saturn, that's also a big deal. So in this video I'm going to be looking at the complexities of the weekend. I do want to look at a few charts of people who do have Mars semisquare Jupiter, because I do think that is an important aspect. And anyway, we'll see what happens. So to begin with, before I really go into the complexities of these aspects going on over the weekend, I want to consider just in general the astrology and the I Ching of this weekend of May the 3rd and 4th, 2025. By the way, if you happen to like this video, as always, I'd be grateful if you were to indeed like it. And of course, if you're not subscribed, I'd be happy to have you as a subscriber. So let's look at what's happening at the moment. So here is the chart for the weekend set for midnight on Sunday, May the 4th. And at that time, the moon is in Leo. So the moon moves into Leo on Saturday. In fact, I think it moves into Leo London time, sort of around lunchtime. I think sort of 12:30 in the afternoon on Saturday. So if you're in the Americas, moon moves into Leo pretty early on Saturday. So for you in the Americas, it's a moon in Leo weekend. If you're in Europe, then the morning, early afternoon of Saturday, the moon will be in late Cancer, but then it moves into Leo. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon won't move into Leo until Saturday evening. And so, that is the moon, and the moon does make a conjunction to Mars, and so moon conjunct Mars, that is something that should never be ignored. Particularly as the moon is making that conjunction to Mars at the same time as Mars is making a semisquare to Jupiter. So that's something that we really need to think about. And there's also a first quarter moon this weekend. The Sun in Taurus, it receives a square from the moon in Leo. So we had the new moon a week ago, and now things have moved on, and we're starting to see the results of this new moon. So if you're in the UK, we just had elections, local elections, and a by-election, and so we're seeing the first results. So that new moon that first quarter moon is very real if you're in the UK. And of course, as I understand it, Reform and Nigel Farage have done pretty well in these elections, and that could be a turning point in British politics. And as far as other things happening, well, Saturday sees Sun semisquare Saturn and Mars semisquare Jupiter. Sun semisquare Saturn and Mars semisquare Jupiter, two very different energies. Sun semisquare Saturn is about restriction and having to be aware of the limitations being placed upon us. But then Mars semisquare Jupiter is the opposite. We want to do more. We want to fight against restrictions. And so, over the weekend, particularly Saturday, there could be a real battle between being restricted, being held back, knowing our limits, and wanting to break free. And then cap it all, we've got Pluto going stationary retrograde. So that's happening, and I'll probably talk about Pluto going stationary retrograde in my video for Monday, which will be Monday the 5th. So Pluto going stationary retrograde, it's not an unusual event, but it reminds us, really does remind us, that Pluto is in Aquarius and it's opposition Mars, and that just adds to the drama with Pluto going stationary retrograde. And I should point out that Pluto is obviously going to go back through Aquarius, but it doesn't actually go back into Capricorn or anything like that. So it may not be completely dramatic, but I think it just adds to the picture that we're in. So that's the overall geocentric picture for the weekend set for New York. If we set that chart for if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia instead, we see a slightly different picture. You can see at the beginning of a weekend the moon is at 1 degree Leo, very early Leo, and that's simply a reminder that Saturday, through most of Saturday, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, the moon will be moving through Cancer. So there's a slightly different feel to the weekend, and it may be that a lot of the emphasis is on Sunday rather than Saturday, but still you've got that sun semisquare Saturn to think about, that sun semisquare. Mars semisquare Jupiter. Well, that's perhaps going to happen sort of later in the weekend. So perhaps things just take a bit of time to develop if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And then there is the heliocentric picture. So looking at things from the perspective of the sun, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. Let's just make sure I've got the okay. There we go. So that's a heliocentric view, and I'm not sure that there is a huge amount to report there. Notice that Venus is starting to make a square to Mars heliocentrically, so Venus has still got a few degrees to go, and so with Venus semisquare Mars, you might say that it is about how we get on with people, whether we like people, whether we don't like people. And some people are great, and through our efforts we can get their attention and we can be attractive. But Venus semisquare Mars can actually repel people. That's what Venus square Mars can be about. So there is a strong issue about likes and dislikes with that Venus-Mars square, but I don't think that Venus-Mars square is especially important. I don't think that it's anything to worry about right now. And I think really heliocentrically, that's probably all there is to report. The Mercury conjunct Pluto that we had yesterday, Mercury is moving quickly now, and so Mercury can move, about 4 degrees in a day heliocentrically. So there's still a bit of a Mercury-Pluto feel to the weekend heliocentrically, and that is about how we persuade, how we pick up facts, whether we reject facts, whether we accept facts, how perhaps people are using facts as a way to control. So if someone tells you something and they sound very sure of their facts, and you say, well, this is, they tell you this is the way it is, that's not necessarily the case. And if someone says something is untrue in a sort of blanket way, it's quite possible that they're just trying to manipulate the argument, control the agenda. And so people's statements should always be questioned. And additionally, the Earth is starting to move towards a sesquiquadrate with Neptune, and that sesquiquadrate with Neptune will be exact. I think pretty exact by the end of the weekend and into next week. And so with Earth sesquiquadrate Neptune, things could be confusing. And linking with what I've said about Mercury conjunct Pluto, don't take things at face value. People say a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean that it's true. So anyway, let's now look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of the 3rd and 4th of May 2025. Aries. Aries, the moon is now in a Leo. It's out of Cancer. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then on Saturday the moon will be moving through Cancer. But overall, moon is moving from Cancer into Leo, and having the moon in Leo is probably going to make things more exciting, and you probably this weekend can be more assertive. You can be yourself, and recently there just might have been something that you were sort of holding back on. You felt that you didn't want to reveal yourself, and now things have changed. And with the moon, not just moon in Leo, but the moon making a conjunction to Mars, then Aries, you very much have something to contribute. And ideally this weekend, you should be doing things your own way, at your own pace. And if something is true to you, then that's fine. Authenticity is going to matter. It's certainly not a time to be doing things other people's way. I don't think that would work, and you might end up feeling rather frustrated. But I think it's all unnecessary. You are in a position where you can do things which are fun, and I think that with Venus starting to make Venus in Aries starting to make a trine to Mars, your influence is starting to make itself felt. Some people do feel bored and uninspired, and you're just a person to lighten things up, brighten things up, not just lighten things up. And so you are an agent of excitement. You can be. Aries, when they're on good form, they can be really exciting people. And I think that this weekend, that really is true. And this does mean that your connections with other people should be really working well. And it is because you've got something to offer, and you've got something to say, and you've got something to suggest. And that's often what people want. They want suggestions. And you're not in the mood for standing still. Maybe you wanted to stand still yesterday, but not today. Sorry, not this weekend. So when I say yesterday, I probably meant, Friday. So this weekend, you don't want to stand still, and you're looking for ways to do things differently. And that really is going to be appreciated. Though the moon making conjunction to Mars, that does mean that in certain situations you could get a little bit annoyed and angry if things aren't exactly going your way. And you'll be annoyed in a quite a spontaneous way. It's not like having grudges against people or trying to make people feel bad. You'll be quite spontaneous in your annoyance, and if something isn't moving fast enough, we want people to hurry up, and hopefully people will understand your viewpoint. Not everyone is going to be sympathetic, that's or understanding of that, but you have to be yourself, and hopefully you're going to be sort of dynamic enough and clear enough that people will just do things your way without causing any trouble, without having any need for you to raise your voice or to show your irritation. Yeah, that things aren't moving fast enough. And so Aries, in general, it's a weekend where you can be yourself and look for new possibilities. Now, it is a first quarter moon, and so the sun is in Taurus, the moon is in Leo, and that first quarter moon might represent in some cases at least, might represent your decision regarding a particular challenge. And the new moon we had a week ago was in Taurus, and it could have been quite a financially orientated new moon, where a financial issue or some other financial matter could have made itself felt. And now with the first quarter moon, you might feel that you know how to deal with it. So if there has been over the last week questions about money and you weren't quite sure what to do, it may be that over the weekend with that moon square the sun, you start to get some ideas about actually what you want to do. Whether the problem, whether it is a problem, it may be something that can just be ignored, or it may just resolve itself, or there just may be something you can do to make things better, or to put your mind at ease. So, I'm not suggesting that you spend too much time worrying about money, but there just could be a financial dimension to that first quarter moon. Taurus, this weekend, you may feel that you want to look after yourself. There's a conjunction between the moon and Mars, and it's in quite a sort of low profile sector of your chart, and you're perhaps feeling that you want to look after yourself. And I think there's some merit in that, but you don't want to take it too far. We have a first quarter moon, and you can see the challenge. The sun is in Taurus. Obviously, the sun is moving through your sign. And the moon makes a square to the sun. And so with that square, there could be a challenge. You would like to be yourself, but you feel that in order to do that, you have to be quite protective of yourself, maybe too protective. And if you just concentrate all your energies on one thing, one thing that you're comfortable with, and it may be about your comfort zone, whatever that comfort zone is, and you spend time in your comfort zone, it may reach a situation where there's a degree of stagnation, and stagnation can lead to irritation and annoyance, and you might get annoyed with yourself. So I think it's important, Taurus, that you respect your need for privacy, by all means, but you don't take it too far. There's always a place for interaction with the outside world, and there's always a place for other people, and it doesn't always have to happen exactly on your wavelength. Sometimes things are a little bit uncomfortable, and you can deal with it. So do make some effort to see what the outside world has to offer. Things aren't necessarily as difficult as they seem, and you should treat other people, particularly the people very close to you, with a degree of respect. You Taurus are quite stubborn. That's the nature of the sign, and you may not be the only stubborn person around. It may be that some other people, maybe partners, people you have to deal with over the course of a weekend, they have their own views, and those views have to be respected, and there's some danger that there may not be a resolution. On the other hand, Venus is starting to make a trine to Mars, and that trine to Mars is now, it's only 5 degrees apart, so it's getting closer, and it might take a few weeks before it really comes together, but it is getting closer, and this means that there is going to be the potential for common ground between you and someone else. This common ground may not be immediately apparent, but it is becoming more obvious, and so with other people, particularly if these people are important to you, if they really matter, then try to be patient. And if you feel that there's any confrontation coming up or a difference of opinion, then maybe you should not get too worked up about it. Maybe, if possible, you should avoid a direct clash. Let things develop in their own way, and don't hold on to things too tightly. I think that's quite important if you want to have a good weekend. Gemini, you are quite active at the moment. There are things you want to do. There are things you want to say, and your mind is on good form. In fact, you do have ideas. Some of your ideas are certainly interesting. They might also be powerful, and you think something, and you think about how it should be, how you'd like it to be, and you're thinking about the changes you would like to enact, and these changes could quite possibly be quite dramatic if you had the chance. If you actually used your willpower to project these changes onto other people and onto the world around you, that really could get noticed. So yeah, in a sense, your ideas could be very disruptive, and that's probably nothing to be afraid of. It's good to be a disruptor. It does help things. People need a bit of disruption, because maybe they've taken too much for granted. They've assumed that everything is going to go in a particular way, and you have a difference of opinion, and so don't necessarily hold back. And the way you communicate right now, the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, is going to be quite powerful. It could get a reaction. Moon conjunct Mars can be about an argument, and you saying things that may not, strictly speaking, be very wise, because someone else might find them offensive, or you just you go in with a view, what is it? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's a Gemini attitude. It's only words, but you're looking at it from a Gemini perspective. Words can have an impact, and words can be hurtful, and your words can be hurtful in the wrong situation. And that's especially the case when you're dealing with anyone who you don't fully know. So you might make assumptions talking to someone. You might be vaguely familiar with them. You've perhaps seen them a lot around, over the last few months, even the last few years, but you don't really know them, and you don't really know what their sensitivities are, and you say something and you say something else, and somehow you create the wrong impression. Also, Gemini, be careful if you are traveling around the place, not long distance traveling. If you're moving maybe a few miles, a few kilometers from place to place, it seems all very easy, but it may not be easy. And what seems like a trivial journey or a trivial visit, may turn out to be longer and more complicated and even perhaps more angry than you'd expected. So, if you're driving, for example, take it easy. Don't get annoyed by other motorists, for example, and don't take risks. And maybe driving should be avoided if you don't need to drive. I mean, why have that aggravation? And even other forms of transport have their own issues, whether it's cycling, going by bus, train, that kind of thing. Seems easy, but for one reason or another, it may not be easy, and it could just make you annoyed. So do consider that. Cancer, you're feeling that something is starting to crystallize. You've been thinking about it for maybe the last week, ever since the new moon was about a week ago, and it's starting to crystallize. We've got a first quarter moon over the weekend, and it's like about you starting to make sense of something, and it's becoming clear, and you're maybe seeing implications, and those implications, they could be material, they could be financial. It could be that you thought that something was going to be okay, was uncomplicated, and now you might realize that there is a cost, or perhaps the cost is greater than you had realized. And now that you see the cost, then you have to start thinking about it, and what are you going to do about it? How are you going to actually deal with it? And you'll find an answer. It's not a problem. It's a time actually when you can be very clear about articulating your interests, whatever those interests might be. Though if money is involved, there'll be no problems about you talking about money and raising financial issues. I know it's the weekend and people like to think about something else, but you're quite clear about what needs to be done and what needs to be said. So that to my mind looks productive, even though it might not feel productive. And additionally, you do have an opportunity to project your interests in general in a way that is clear. And so if there's anything you want to achieve, anything you want to clarify, then now might be the time to do it. And so what are you trying to do? What are your ambitions at the moment? And right now you can talk to people about them, and maybe people haven't fully understood what you were trying to say, but I think they do now understand. So it could be a time of clarity and assertion, and you can take control of the cycle, the lunar cycle, which started a week ago, and you can take control of it, and that's going to help you, over the next few weeks as this lunar cycle develops. Turning to relationships, I think that relationships, they can be okay, But you have to consider your own ability to, to be assertive. But I think you can be assertive because the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and you're going to be very good at articulating your own interests. But that could, in certain situations, make relationships a little bit difficult because of your own assertiveness, maybe or even your own defensiveness. So that is something that you need to be aware of. And so relationships probably need to happen, on your terms. And you're not in the mood for suffering fools gladly this weekend with that moon conjunct Mars. And if there is any form of discussion or argument, I think Cancers at the moment are going to want to have their way. You're going to want the other person to accept that you are in the right, and you're going to want people to do things your way. You're going to want, if you've got a plan, you're going to want the other person to agree to your plan. And the problems start if there is a disagreement, or even if you don't get the enthusiasm you're looking for. So if you are going to be assertive and strongly assertive, you have to ask yourself, what are you going to be assertive about? Is it something that is actually worth fighting for, worth arguing about? And this does go back to money. Money could be an area of contention, and perhaps you feel you have to make someone be more aware of how important money is, or perhaps someone's been careless with money, but you may feel that you have to get the point across, and that might not always be welcome. So you have to decide how far to take things. You can certainly look after yourself, but do you want to look after yourself to the extent by which certain relationships, could become a little bit strained? Leo, things are moving. Your sign is emphasized because we have a conjunction between the moon and Mars in Leo. You've had Mars in Leo for some time. The moon has joined Mars in Leo, and so with this moon Mars conjunction in Leo, I get the feeling that you're quite a tough person at the moment. You are certainly looking after your own interests, and you have clear ideas about what you want to do and what you don't want to do, and at the same time you may feel that something has to be battled against. You are aware of a bit of a struggle, and the reason for this is that the Sun is making a 45-degree aspect to Saturn. Sun is your ruler, and so it just may feel that something is trying to hold you back, and therefore you might feel that you have to fight against it. So the question is, what is holding you back? Is it real? Is it your imagination? Is it your own fears? And it could be. There does seem to be something that you're worried about, and you feel you can't go all in on something, or maybe you feel that you're not able to really pursue something as far as you would like because of these fears. Now, it's absolutely possible that you project these fears, and as far as you're concerned, someone else might be holding you back, and you have to ask yourself, is this real? Well, where there is a partnership, there is always the possibility of frustration, having to deal with another person. And with this Sun semisquare Saturn, it may suggest that, whatever you're doing this weekend, you do need to really be in control, and you do not want to be in a situation where another person is holding you back, or where another person might be holding you back, where you have to consider other people's interests. So, ideally, you would be at a distance from other people. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter how much you care about them. Other people could be a problem. And where there is a possibility for a disagreement, it could become real. So perhaps you shouldn't take chances, and just make sure that your decisions matter. Though, don't make things worse by over imagining things. You might be in a situation where someone is not necessarily going out of their way to hold you back, but you might imagine they're holding you back because maybe you feel you've got a responsibility towards them, and it is a feeling of responsibility that is holding you back. And so Leo, try to be as independent as possible, not just for your own sake, but also for other people's sake. You could be quite difficult this weekend, and something about you're just very focused actually on what you want to do, not what other people want to do. And if that's the way you feel, then that is a good reason for not getting too close to anyone. So if you bear that in mind, then I think you should be okay. Another thing over the course of the weekend, really think about what you'd like to achieve. I mean, I think that actually you can achieve quite a lot this weekend, and you will have a lot of energy. So if there's something you want, then give it everything you've got, and make sure that there is no resistance, but no one is in your way. And if you can do that, then it could actually be a weekend that is actually very successful. And maybe the one thing that might slow you down is simply your own fears. There's something bothering you, and I think whatever it is, it needn't bother you. But you don't want to dwell on those fears, dwell on potential obstacles. You might be thinking about all the things that could hold you back. Well, don't think that way. You really can have a clear run at whatever it is you're trying to achieve over the weekend. Virgo, you are thinking hard. You've certainly got ideas, and these ideas are not necessarily anything you want to talk about or discuss. Maybe things going on in your own private world, but these ideas are of value. And perhaps the challenge here, Virgo, is to find a way of getting these ideas out into the open. You may not want to get them out into the open. Maybe you should. And to take it further, it may be about you and you as an individual, and you definitely are an individual. You have a unique view of the world, and you have a view of the world which, in fact, could be quite disruptive, and perhaps you should be disruptive, and you have to work out how best you can change things, and that is a challenge. It requires you to firstly decide how you want to be disruptive, what you need to say, what you need to do, and then there is a struggle to assert your individuality and to make it absolutely clear who you are and what you want to do, and force people to pay attention to you. And how do you do it? Well, a direct approach may not work. Perhaps you have to be more subtle. Just because people don't notice you, aren't looking at you, doesn't mean that you're not having an impact. And it may be a time, Virgo, or when you are able to, just sort of work behind the scenes, not doing anything obvious, but all the time something really is going on, and it may relate to you being actually subtly manipulative. We still have a heliocentric conjunction between Mercury and Pluto. So that Mercury-Pluto heliocentric conjunction, well, it was exact on Friday, but I think it's still in force. And so that heliocentric aspect, the Mercury conjunct Pluto, is quite cosmic. It's not necessarily immediately available, but you have the potential there to create change. And maybe you're helped by Pluto going stationary direct. And Pluto going stationary direct, it's quite a subtle influence, but Pluto going stationary direct might allow you to just make changes to the way you do things. And if you change the way you do things, maybe people have just assumed that you're going to do things in a particular way, and then you make your own changes, and that leads to another change, which leads to another change, and before you know it, you're actually having quite a dramatic impact. And as far as relationships are concerned, you shouldn't make assumptions about anyone, in the same way that other people shouldn't make assumptions about you. But there are some people who are in the mood for action. They want things to happen, and they have been feeling a little bit frustrated, but now they want to get a move. They want to get a move on, and so if you have to deal with people over the course of a weekend, don't underestimate them, and don't underestimate their ability to do things, and do things with actually a considerable amount of energy. And so don't be surprised if someone acts faster than you expect, and they may surprise you with their dynamism, and even with their impulsiveness. Some people are impulsive, and impulsiveness isn't always a good thing. So observe other people, and think about what they might do, and don't make assumptions. Perhaps in the past they've been relatively quiet, and nothing much seems to have been going on. But things are changing. So it is important to be prepared, but you yourself, as I've already said, you are looking for change, and you have the ability to create change. And perhaps it's a situation where you want change and other people want change, and your approaches might be different, but maybe in the end everyone wants the same thing. Libra, you are in a position where you feel you don't want to be alone. You are appreciative of the social environment, and what might be possible. And so this weekend you might want to be socially active, and so if there are people to meet, places to go to, then perhaps, Libra, you should be availing yourself of these opportunities. And when you are with other people in a group, things can happen quickly. There is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. That Moon-Mars conjunction in Leo is very active. It can be quite exciting. It can be also a bit turbulent. Moon-Mars conjunction can be about a disagreement or an argument of some kind, and so that is something you need to think about. And also this Moon Mars conjunction is linked up with the Sun. So we got a first quarter moon, and this first quarter moon, it relates back to the new moon. So we had a new moon approximately a week ago, at 7 or 8 Libra, and this new moon represents is a new cycle for everyone, and that includes you. And it was a time perhaps when you had fairly deep thoughts about where things were going and what was happening, and you might have had a few doubts, and those doubts may have been developing over the course of a week, and you've been working with them. And maybe by socializing, you are challenging yourself. So you're socializing if you're from a position where you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and you're trying to take things further, and maybe you're trying to get over some of your fears and some of your concerns. And so if things happen in your social life which you weren't expecting, which seem to bother you, maybe your first response isn't necessarily the right response. So if you are worried about a situation, maybe it's just not as bad as it feels, and maybe it's just about you being able to assert yourself and make your position clear, and that's all that's needed. And that's probably it. It's not a time for ambiguity. Now, there could be ambiguity because Venus, your ruler, is still making a conjunction to Neptune, and there is a temptation there to keep some of your feelings to yourself because you're not absolutely sure what you believe in, what you want to say, and it can sometimes be difficult to work out what's going on. But what do you do when there is confusion, when there is just a smokescreen over everything? Well, what you could do is you could just ask questions, ask for clarification. And it may not feel like the right thing to do, but if you ask for clarifications, I think then you will receive that clarification, and you'll find that some of the smoke will start to disappear, and things will become clearer, and that means that people will become clearer. You'll have a better understanding of other people's motives and also their limitations. So Libra, if you want a good weekend, it's just important to be gently assertive, and if something needs to be said, well, it needs to be said, and you're quite capable of saying it and in such a way that isn't going to cause too much disruption. Scorpio, this weekend you have a powerful belief about what you can do, what you should do, and I think actually you may be a little bit impatient. You're going to want things done, and you'll have an idea about how they should be done, and you will be very, very clear about it. And also, I think, Scorpio, you're going to be quite good at asserting yourself, and particularly when it comes to asserting your authority. If you have any opportunity to demonstrate your authority, to show your authority, then this weekend, that is absolutely something you can do. And it's because of this conjunction between the moon and Mars. It's this Moon-Mars conjunction. It's quite a strong conjunction, and it's in a fixed sign. It's in Leo. Leo is, of course, a high-profile sign from a Scorpio perspective, but the moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Mars. It's also making a trine to Venus, especially on Saturday. But so you've got moon makes a trine to Venus, then it makes a conjunction to Mars. And because of that, Scorpio, you're able to make things happen your way, but in most cases without having to have a big fight about it. You have a good understanding of what makes other people tick and how to be persuasive. And I think that if there's something you want, something you need, then I think it shouldn't be a problem making your feelings clear. And yeah, I think that in most cases you're going to get your way. And that does mean, Scorpio, that relationships should be an area of satisfaction. You'll be able to get what you want from other people, and you'll be able to get on well with them. Although you always have to consider what you want, because your needs are really, really important at the moment. And I do think that you can get your way without having to cause too much trouble. I think that most people are going to be reasonably understanding and reasonably cooperative. So relationships should work. Relationships at all levels, though I think relationships which are focused on particular things, not necessarily romantic relationships, but relationships which are based upon a common purpose, or that might be partnerships, maybe sort of business or financial partnerships, or where you and someone else are trying to work together on a project. Those kind of relationships which have a practical nature should really work especially well. And although you're going to be the person who is, in most cases, the initiator, the one who is, in the final analysis, the one in control, I think the other person is going to respond to you, and I think that you will also be able to respond to them in a way which should be relatively harmonious. Sagittarius, there's stuff going on in fire signs, and we've got the Moon and Mars in Leo, and we've got got Venus in Aries. Also, we've got Mercury in Aries. But more importantly, we've got the Moon makes a trine to Venus, Moon in Leo, making a trine to Venus in Aries. Then the Moon makes a conjunction to Mars in Leo. So that looks to me quite good, and it looks to me to be quite energizing. And so, if you recently felt that you haven't got enough energy, or you haven't been able to see things through, then, things are moving. And it shouldn't take much effort on your part. And, you have the right level of strength, and additionally, you're quite experimental at the moment. You're prepared to look at things from different angles, and if something is different and is unusual, then in many cases, Sagittarius, you're just going to want to go for it. And so that does make you an exciting person. And yeah, you're someone who can really you can make things happen, but you don't want to take things too far, because there is a semisquare between Mars and Jupiter. Mars is 45 degrees from Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler, and Mars can be an aggravating influence. And so, ideally, you'll allow the weekend to sort of move forward in a fairly natural way, and you will be sort of lifted by everything going on around you and all the excitement, and you don't have to try too hard. But if you do try too hard, if you start to concentrate on one thing and you start to put all your energy into that one thing, then that might actually create an imbalance. And so, that Mars-Jupiter square, semisquare, indicates the potential for something getting out of control and something going wrong when you don't expect it, but you should have expected it because you'll perhaps be seeing that you've been putting too much effort into something, and it might be the case that you just don't know what you're getting yourself into. You take something too far. Maybe you don't know the rules. You don't know what's expected of you, and then something goes wrong, or you're in a situation where you've started something, but you don't necessarily know how to stop it. So don't be excessive this weekend. It can really be a good weekend. Where things do happen. They move in a way that is exciting, and you're feeling good about everything. But just something might go wrong if you overdo it, and it just may be that you're behaving in a way that isn't entirely natural. You just decide you want to stop in one place, and that causes a disturbance. But it needn't happen. And I just felt, or I do feel, that I just have to warn you about that semisquare between Mars and Jupiter. That Mars semisquare Jupiter. I mean, I'll be talking more about that Mars semisquare Jupiter later in the video, but it needs to be treated with caution. Mars Jupiter aspects can be the most difficult aspects. So don't allow yourself to fall into a trap to sort of get yourself into a situation which really was completely unnecessary. Capricorn, we have a semisquare between the Sun and Saturn. So this weekend there are two semisquares, and one between Mars and Jupiter. And I was just talking to Sagittarius about this semisquare between Mars and Jupiter. But we also have a semisquare between Sun and Saturn, and of course Saturn is your ruler. And so when you see a semisquare, you have to think, well, this could be a problem, and you have to think about what it might mean. And Sun semisquare Saturn may be something just annoying you. It just could be it could just be a difference of opinion. You want things done in one way, other people want things done in a different way, and another person's approach may be just too trivial or doesn't strike you as being appropriate, and that just could cause a certain amount of irritation. But it can work the other way. With the Sun semisquare Saturn, there is a possibility that you cause another person unnecessary problems, or your own rigidity could be an issue. That you don't want change in a particular area, and you hold firm about that view, and you have the ability to bring things to a halt. That's great to be able to bring things to a halt, but is that desirable? Now, if you want to bring something to a halt that is dangerous, or you regard it as being dangerous, then this weekend that is absolutely something you can do. You may actually be a graphite rod. Is that a phrase? I don't really know much about nuclear physics, but I think that graphite rods. They're put into nuclear reactors to slow things down, and so I think it stops the reactor going critical. And so with that Saturn semisquare Sun, you can actually behave like a graphite rod. A situation that you may feel is getting out of hand could go critical, you can bring it down to earth, very, very quickly. And that's a power you've got. And, that's a power, though, that has to be treated with respect. Do you need to bring something down to earth? It might, for example, be that other people are enjoying themselves, doing something that's fun, and you just want to close the whole thing down, and that's something you very much can do. On the other hand, it could be a dangerous situation. You can see that it could end up as a dangerous situation, and you want to interact. You want to stop it at an early stage, before it gets out of hand. And so that's something you can do. And so if you feel over the weekend that something bad could be happening, and you can actually bring it to a halt, and that's great. But it's a power you have to not abuse. And in general, Capricorn, you are taking things quite seriously over the weekend. You have a serious approach. You don't want to trivialize anything, and you may be quite sort of wrapped up in your feelings and your worries. And there are a lot of things to worry about. We've all got things to worry about, but your worries might have a particular impact on you at the moment. All the things that could go wrong. And again, it's good that you have these worries. Someone's got to have these worries, and it may feel that you're taking on board other people's worries. Other people should be worried, but they're not worried. They're just going through life as if nothing's going to go wrong, but you're taking it all on. And that can be hard work. And it's possible, Capricorn, that other people should be worried, and perhaps you need to make them worried. And the things you say can change their attitude. And something that was supposed to be light and free and easy is not like that at all. It could go wrong, but it could go wrong. And so in the end, you might end up as being a bit of a Cassandra. Cassandra, wasn't she the prophetess in Troy? She had the ability to see the future, but she was cursed by the fact that no one would listen to her. And so you could become a Cassandra over the weekend. And how do you get people to listen? Well, that's for you to work out. Aquarius, the Sun is making a semisquare to Saturn, and I was talking to Capricorn about this semisquare between the Sun and Saturn. After all, Saturn rules Capricorn, so it would be quite reasonable to think that Sun semisquare Saturn should have an impact on Capricorn. And Saturn also rules Aquarius. And so this Sun semisquare Saturn could definitely have an impact upon you. And the area that it might have most impact on is relationships, because Saturn is ruler of Aquarius, your sign. Sun is ruler of Leo, your opposite sign. So it's absolutely logical that Sun semisquare Saturn is going to have an influence on you. And so one way of seeing a Sun's semisquare Saturn could be that you and another person, or perhaps some other people, are going to have a lot to do with each other, because there is a contact. It is a semisquare. But the question is, what kind of contact is it going to be? And the semisquare is a tense aspect. It's half a square. Square is 90 degrees, a semisquare is 45 degrees. And so there could well be a clash between you and another person. Just a difference of opinion, or it may just be two personalities just not interacting very well. And so you need to be aware this weekend that you absolutely cannot get on with everyone. And the closer you get to someone, the greater the possibility of a clash. And it may not be a clash that you can even define. It may not be, oh, we had an argument about this. It just may be a personality clash. It just doesn't work. Sometimes you just feel it. First few seconds of meeting someone, it just doesn't work. But even if you know someone very well, you can have a clash. It may just be a temporary thing. This Sun semisquare Saturn is not going to go on forever. The Sun will move away from that semisquare to Saturn. But while it's exact, you have to treat it with respect. And we get supporting information here because the Moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and that Moon conjunct Mars is in your opposite sign of Leo, and because Leo then has a link with relationships. So what I'm saying is that we have two independent events today: Moon conjunct Mars, Sun semisquare Saturn, which indicate relationship difficulties. Now, that doesn't mean to say there are going to be relationship difficulties. You have to look at these forecasts, from a sort of all things being equal perspective, and just being aware of, how things could turn out. And of course, we don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies. It may be that relationships are absolutely fine. You're getting on very well with people, and the last thing you need is to just mess things up by making some kind of prophecy or prediction, and that just it distracts you and may actually change your behavior. And theoretically, it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's always the issue when you're listening to astrologers or tarot card readers or psychics. Sometimes the prophecy can influence things, and that's not something we want. But I do think that other people do need to be treated with real caution. Things could go wrong, and there could be disagreements. And if you then see the possibility of disagreements, it may be that this weekend that you shouldn't get too close to anyone, even though you really feel, I think, that you want to be with people. The Moon is in Leo, the Moon is in your opposite sign. That would suggest that relationships and other people are going to be important. But that doesn't mean you have to follow that through. You may not want to take the risk. But it's possible that you want to know the truth, that you can see difficulties starting and you want to resolve them. So if you want to resolve anything and you're prepared for all possibilities, so for example, if there's someone who you're not sure about and you want to know the truth one way or another, is this going to work out? Is this relationship worthwhile? Or maybe you should go your separate ways. Maybe now this weekend might be a good actually time to really put things to the test, because if there are any fault lines between you and another person, I think those fault lines are going to become very strong and very obvious. So I'm sorry to be a little bit negative about relationships, but I'm just telling you what I see. I have to interpret Sun semisquare Saturn and Moon conjunct Mars somehow. And with that Moon conjunct Mars, though, there is a silver lining, because there are two aspects going on. The Moon makes a trine to Venus, and then it makes a conjunction. Then it makes a conjunction to Mars. So this might indicate that there's actually a way to resolve things, and because of Venus, and because Venus is starting to move towards a trine of Mars. And so if you and someone else have not been getting on with each other, that moon making a trine to Venus, then conjunct Mars, may just allow things to come together if you take a sort of a very dynamic but mature approach, and really try to understand what the problems might be in a relationship, but also look for the similarities that you and another person have, and perhaps you've got the same priorities under it all. And so relationships could work very well today, provided you really are able to work on them. And I think that you can find the truth. The truth is available, and part of a reason for that is that we've got a first quarter moon. And the first quarter moon, we've had a new moon a week ago, and we know with the sun in Taurus, there was a new moon at 7 or 8 Taurus, and now the moon has moved on. It's now in Leo, and it could be that with another person's help, you can resolve something. And it was an issue that started a week ago, and it was an issue that led to you perhaps feeling a few uncertainties. You weren't quite sure what was going on. You weren't quite sure where you stood on a particular matter. You weren't quite sure where other people stood on a particular matter. But this first quarter moon can resolve things potentially in a way that is satisfactory. And it's satisfactory because you see the truth and you start to see results. So overall, this weekend is not necessarily going to be easy, but it is dynamic, and I think that you might find by the end of a weekend that a lot of questions get answered. Pisces, Mars is making a semisquare to Jupiter, and I regard this semisquare between Mars and Jupiter as being an important aspect. And I think it's an important aspect for Pisces because Jupiter is your ruler. And so with Mars semisquare Jupiter might indicate something that is actually quite irritating. And so this irritation could be about you having to make changes that you don't actually want to make. You thought you'd got everything sorted out. You thought you'd understood where things were going. And then you see evidence that this is not necessarily the case. And you might have to start again. And that's not going to make you happy. And matters are made more difficult by the fact that Mars is not just making a semisquare to Jupiter, but you've also got a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. So if you've got a Moon-Mars conjunction, that's annoying. And it's annoying having to make changes, changes that you weren't necessarily prepared for. And your own approach might be sort of uncharacteristically stubborn. You just might be holding onto what you have and feeling that you don't want to make change, and you will resist that. But some things are inevitable, and some of your plans have to be adjusted, I think. And it's not necessarily going to be easy. And additionally, you don't want too much pressure because this Moon conjunct Mars, both of them making semisquares to Jupiter, that could sap your energy. And if you find yourself rushing around all over the place, trying to respond to everything, you're going to lose energy, and you might end up feeling under the weather because you've try to do too much, you try to take on too much. And that might be another way in which you need to respond to Mars semisquare Jupiter. Mars semisquare Jupiter is perhaps the temptation to take a lot of action, to be doing lots of things, to be overwhelming yourself with different tasks that need to be done. And perhaps you should just get those temptations in perspective. You don't have to do everything, and you need to hold, you do need to sort of hold firm. As a Pisces, that the water is important, that you need to go with the flow, but you need to go with the flow in a natural way and not in a crazy way. And if you have to respond to everything, you could get exhausted, and your well-being could be undermined, and that really is not something we want, is it? And I would prefer to be more positive, but I have to tell you what I see, and so I think, in some respects, this weekend could actually be quite difficult. And I think that the best way of dealing with a weekend is just to accept that nothing is written in stone, that perhaps some of your plans have to be adjusted, but you don't want to overreact. And if you don't overreact, and if you hold firm to what is really important to you, then then the weekend should be okay. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 43, which is breakthrough. And this hexagram number 43, it's suggestive of some kind of danger. There's something that we need to be very aware of, that could engulf us, and we're seeing the first signs of this danger, and it's a danger that might be impacting other people. And the I Ching talks about the cries of the prisoners as they are captured by the enemy army. We can hear those cries, and if we're not careful, we could be captured as well. And so the I Ching is telling us that we need to quit the scene. So in a way, it might be about other people's misfortune, and we're aware of what's happening elsewhere, and then it occurs to us that it could happen to us as well. So we have to do something about it, and we have to make the matter known. So as far as us and the people around us are concerned, we mustn't just keep quiet about it. We must say, hold on, there is a problem here. We need to do something about it right now. Because if we don't do something about it, then things could go wrong. We could get captured, or we could get engulfed by, whatever this problem is. So think about this weekend. Think about where that danger might lie, and ask yourself, is it a situation where you do need to make your escape? Now, there is a moving line here, and the moving line is the second line from the bottom, and the second line is certainly about a danger. It is there. But the I Ching tells us that it's okay. It's telling us that we have ample warning. We'll be warned in time, and we'll be able to act in the right way. So when you get that first warning, if you get that first warning, then you take action, and you're able to get out and avoid whatever it is that might be showing up. This might be about Saturday, by the way. Saturday is maybe quite a tough day because, astrologically on Saturday we got Sun semisquare Saturn, we got Mars semisquare Jupiter. I'll be talking about those aspects in a moment. But we understand, we've got the warning, and we are able to make our escape, and that allows us to move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram 49, which is revolution. So, what this might mean is that, having had a narrow escape and realizing that things aren't actually that good, that, we were in a difficult situation, we feel that it's time for a change. This is not good enough. And it could be that, certain people have been making mistakes, they've been sort of giving poor advice, and now you have to stand up for yourself and make your own decisions and, start to assert yourself. And, on Sunday we've got, it could be Saturday, could be Sunday, depends on your time zone. We've got I think it's sort of more Saturday. Well, just as Saturday turns to Sunday, I think there's a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. So Moon and Mars is about, in Leo, is about maybe asserting oneself. And so one has to create this change. And it's kind of appropriate that we've got revolution, this hexagram, on a weekend where Pluto is going stationary retrograde. So with Pluto going stationary retrograde, that means the idea of transformation and change is very real. So, ask yourself, what is it? You don't want to have a repeat situation where you had to get out of a really difficult situation. You don't want that to ever happen again. And so change is required, and perhaps there needs to be a change of leadership, and perhaps you have to adopt a position of leadership because you understand what's going on, and so you may have to lead your own revolution. Of course, I'm not indicating that you should lead a real revolution. That can go wrong, but it's a revolution. For example, in your own home, it may just be in your own life. It may not involve anyone. It just may be your realization that you haven't been doing things properly, but now things are going to change. And so, as far as the astrology for the weekend is concerned, I do think that it is actually quite complicated. There's a lot happening, and it's kind of difficult to sort of piece it all together. And so I have the image of a first quarter moon on the thumbnail, and so it might be a good idea to start with that first quarter moon. And so the first quarter moon is here. This is the first quarter moon. It takes place on Sunday afternoon, and this is what Sunday afternoon London time, 2:52 p.m. London time on Sunday. So there is the sun at 14:21 Taurus, and the moon is at 14:21 Leo. And so when we look at a full moon, first quarter moon, this is, if you like, the first crisis. We're in a lunar cycle. We're in a new lunar cycle. The moon is waxing. We had a new moon. Was it on? I think it was on April 27th. I think so. Or was it? When was that? It's something like that. And so we had a week ago. We had we had the new moon. So we had the new moon. Now we've got the crisis of the lunar cycle, and where we have to think. Well, we have to take action. What are we going to do? And this moon it's quite close to a conjunction of Mars. I mean, not exactly conjunct Mars, but there is a feeling that we need to be quite dynamic about addressing whatever it is. There is a problem, and something needs to be dealt with, and we need to do something. Now, this first quarter moon is kind of linked with Saturn, you'll see that there is a sesquiquadrate between the moon and Saturn. Also, the moon is making a semisquare. Sorry, it is also making a sesquiquadrate to the Aries point, and so Saturn may represent some kind of limitation, something that is really holding us back, that we have to be very aware of. And so let me just show you this full moon. If we look at the 90-degree dial, sorry, not full moon, this first quarter moon. Remember, on a 90-degree dial, squares and oppositions are shown as conjunctions, and so you can see right down there is the new moon, and so this new moon is pretty close to the Aries point. It's pretty close to the opposition, pretty close to the sesquiquadrate of Saturn, and it's also on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So there is Saturn and Neptune. We know that Saturn and Neptune are very close to one another. Saturn is right at the end of Pisces. Neptune is right at the beginning of Aries, and in fact, you've got the Sun and the Moon both on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and I think that this first quarter moon is about fear. I mean, the Saturn-Neptune Saturn-Neptune conjunction is about fear. Saturn is about holding on to what we believe in. There are things that we really need. We don't want to let go of them. But Neptune, we want to relate to something larger than ourselves, and perhaps we're afraid of the future. And those things that we're holding on to very tightly, we may feel that we're in the process of losing them. And this first quarter moon is really bringing all that into focus. So I do think that this first quarter moon is possibly quite difficult. And but also the first quarter moon is making a 135-degree aspect to the Aries point, with Saturn, Neptune. There's a lot of fear in the world, and people don't want change. They know change is inevitable, but they are absolutely holding on to it. So that's one thing going on this weekend. And then we've also got the Sun making a semisquare to Saturn, and so this takes place on Saturday morning London time, and so Sun is exactly 45 degrees from Saturn, and so this is a time of frustration. Many of us may feel frustrated. We can't get things done, and it may also be about broken negotiations. I think it was Nick Campion, Charles Harvey, and Michael Bagent in their book on mundane astrology. They link the Sun-Saturn cycle with treaties and arms. I think he was talking about arms negotiation. Arms negotiations and people meeting with each other, and that's a Sun-Saturn theme according to that book. And so we have Sun semisquare Saturn, and so that may emphasize negotiations and how they are going, but it's a semisquare to Saturn, so that might indicate that negotiations are not going entirely well. And so we know that there are negotiations going on all over the place between. It's not just in Ukraine and Russia, because we haven't heard about India and Pakistan. This is very dangerous still. What's going on between India and Pakistan, and with India suspending or ending the Indus Waters Treaty. So that's an example of a treaty that is just come to an end. That treaty has been around since before I was born, and so this Sun semisquare Saturn is just reminding us that it is difficult and things are starting to break down a bit. And Sun semisquare Saturn, what do we do? Yeah, there is a feeling of frustration, and then there is Mars semisquare Jupiter. So completely opposite energy to the Sun semisquare Saturn. Mars semisquare Jupiter. You want things to happen, and I do think that this semisquare between Mars and Jupiter, it really does matter. And this is a precise moment of the semisquare. So London time, it's just after midnight on Sunday, and so there is Mars making a exact semisquare to Jupiter, but the Moon is involved with it. So at the moment that Mars is semisquare Jupiter, the Moon is conjunct Mars. So I do think that this is actually a very dangerous aspect, and it could well coincide with perhaps something quite explosive. Something has to give, and I mean, I don't know if there's much point in using astrocartography. I mean, with this, okay, you could say that Moon-Mars conjunction, it's relatively close to the opposition of Zelensky's Sun in Aquarius, but the president of Ukraine. But he seems to be pretty bulletproof. He seems to be able to get through everything. So, if anyone has got something at 6 degrees of fixed sign, I mean, Zelensky's Sun Venus is at 5 degrees of a fixed sign. So it's a bit off. So that might give hints about who might be impacted by this Moon Mars, but it may just be something in general going on in the world, and we could see something quite explosive over the next over the next few days, with this Mars semisquare Jupiter. As far as how it affects us, I think that many of us are just going to want to take action, perhaps in response to that Sun semisquare Saturn. We're going to be sick of the restriction symbolized by the Sun Saturn semisquare. And so Mars Jupiter, we want to do something. Let's get out of this problem and let's force it. And so that could be dangerous. And again, it's going to be particularly dangerous on an international level. Something seems to be stuck, and Trump might want to resolve something quickly. That could be a way that Mars semisquare Jupiter works. He wants to resolve something quickly, and we shouldn't forget with that Jupiter that actually it's quite close to planets in his chart. Let's just have a look at Trump's chart, by the way. Because I hadn't really thought of it. So if we take Trump's chart and we compare Trump's chart with this with the Mars semisquare Jupiter, just to see what's happening. So Trump's got his Sun at 2256 Gemini, and he's got his Moon at 2112 Sagittarius. So that indicates to me that that Jupiter is actually at the moment on Trump's Sun-Moon midpoint, and so Mars is therefore making a semisquare semisquare sesquiquadrate to his sun moon midpoint. So I think you could argue that Trump may actually be impacted by this Mars semisquare Jupiter, perhaps in quite a big way, and it may say something about his decisions, what he decides to do. And Mars semisquare Jupiter is about being in a deadlock, being a little bit frustrated, and feeling you have to do something. So I think we do need to look at the White House with this aspect. You might say, oh, Jupiter on the Sun Moon midpoint is a good thing. I mean, it should be. I mean, having Jupiter on your Sun Moon midpoint is quite optimistic, and he's going to want to do something dramatic, and it may well turn out to be fortunate. If Mars wasn't involved, I would have said that Jupiter on his Sun Moon midpoint is actually quite a good thing. But it's just that Mars just messes things up, and especially as you've got the Moon conjunct Mars as well, and so there's something just a little bit too impulsive about it. And I think that over the weekend, we really need to think about Trump's decisions and Trump's impulsive decisions, and perhaps how Trump responds to something happening from outside. He's supposed to be measured and so forth, but I think I'm just a little bit worried here. Though, I mean, it may be fine, but Trump needs to get good advice and to be very calm and not jump to conclusions over the weekend and perhaps into the beginning of next week. That's pretty much all I want to say about Mars and Jupiter. I just wanted to quickly look at some examples of Mars-Jupiter in some charts of a couple of women. Now, why women? Well, Mars is a male planet, and so if a woman has Mars, Mars in her chart, it could well be projected, and so Mars might indicate the kind of man she is attracted to or gets involved with. And so, to take a few examples of women who have or had Mars making a semisquare or a sesquiquadrate aspect to Jupiter, one chart which I have looked at recently, one sort of infamous chart, is the chart of Mara Hindley, the child murderer in the 60s, real anti-icon, and she has Mars. There's her Mars at 24 Leo, and it is semisquare Jupiter. And I would interpret that, given what we know about Mara Hindley, is that she partnered with Ian Brady to commit these murders. So Mars semisquare Jupiter may not just be about her, but it might be about the kind of men she's attracted to. And so Mars semisquare Jupiter, a man who is capable of violence, who has murderous thoughts. So in her case, that would fit quite well, and particularly this idea of projecting that Mars. And another example of a woman who has Mars semisquare Jupiter is Melinda Gates. So she's the former wife of Bill Gates, and so she has Mars semisquare Jupiter, not an exact Mars semisquare Jupiter, but that may say something about the man she's attracted to and how the man she's attracted to behaves. And I'm not going to make any comments, but I'm sure you have your own thoughts on Bill Gates, and you might regard that Mars semisquare Jupiter as fitting him. And additionally, going back to Donald Trump, his Ivana Trump, who was married to him, this is her chart, February the 20th, 1949, and she has actually an exact Mars semi-square Jupiter. We have a time of birth for Ivana Trump, and so she has an exact Mars square semi-square Jupiter. And you could say that Mars semi-square Jupiter describes Donald Trump. So that was how he manifested in her life as Mars semi-square Jupiter. Someone who is trying all sorts of things, is active. Sometimes he succeeds, sometimes he fails. I mean, not so great with the casinos, but he's always trying something. And a man there's constant energy around him, always saying something, doing something. And we shouldn't forget that with this Mars semi-square Jupiter this weekend, it's hitting Trump's chart. By the way, Stormy Daniels, another woman associated with Mars semi-square another woman associated with associated with Donald Trump, has Mars semi-square Jupiter, and there's not semi-square, actually a sesquiquadrate, and so that's again, I don't know about the other men in her life, but she certainly has Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. And one final event, the suicide of Nero. Nero committed suicide in AD 68, and when Nero committed suicide, I don't know what time he committed suicide. I've gone for noon, and so Mars. There's Mars, there's Jupiter, pretty close semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. So for Nero, Emperor of Rome, Mars semi-square Jupiter, he had all of this energy and action, and he used that energy for destroying himself. Mars semi-square Jupiter also launched a civil war kind of a civil war, but I think that AD 68 was known as the year of the four emperors. So Mars semi-square Jupiter, the whole Roman Empire went into kind of a sort of panic mode, and Mars semi-square Jupiter couldn't fix on any one emperor, and you went through, I can't remember the order, you had Nero and Otho and Galba, and maybe there was even someone else, Vitellius, is that right? And then there was Vespasian in the end. So that's another way in which Mars semi-square Jupiter can work. And that's all I've got to say on the subject of Mars semi-square Jupiter. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good weekend, and if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.